Well, hey everyone, my name is Nathan Jones, and if you're new here, welcome. I talk about all things movies, specifically Blu-rays, and today we are continuing with my film journey, where I've been physically writing down in a journal. This is my Lord of the Rings journal that is almost full now, actually, so I'll have to get a new one. But I've been physically writing down all of the things that I've been watching and all the things that I've been picking up. And it's week 15, so it's been a really strong way to get back into just my love of this medium. And it's been exciting to do videos each week where I kind of cover the things that I've been watching. And it's been a really fun experiment, and I'm going to continue doing this. Last time I was here, I wanted to cover a few things. One is this bad boy right here, this book, the All the Haunts Be Ours box set, a folk horror storybook. And this is actually coming out in the new All the Haunts Be Ours Volume 2 box set. There's that first one right there next to it. And I adore this. So all of November, I'm going to be probably covering some folk horror and getting that box set and showing you that. It's probably going to be the next video is when I pick that up, and I'll just show it off and be really gushy about it. But besides that, there's also, it's been spooky month, right? I'm sure a lot of you have been watching a lot of really good horror films and watching a lot of good classics. In fact, before we jump into the things that I watched this week and the things that I've been picking up, there's a Criterion flash sale haul that I'll cover as well. I want to know really quick down in the comment section down below, what have you been watching? What have you been picking up for the week? And then also, what have you been watching for the end of October, this as we're approaching Halloween very, very shortly. So let's jump into the titles that I watched and also some titles that I picked up from Criterion. So let's jump into first some Italian films. Before we jump into this big box set that is probably the cover of this thumbnail, which is this little bad boy, this right here, the Severin's Danza Macabra Volume 1 box set, the Italian Gothic collection. We're going to cover this here in a bit, but let's cover two films that I watched also during this week that I really, really loved. In fact, one of them I love a little bit more than the other one, and I was actually very surprised at how much I love this. But the first film I want to talk about is Lucio Fulci's The House by the Cemetery. So I actually just recently got into Fulci. In fact, I've only seen a few films from him. I've watched things like The Beyond, and I've also seen Zombie, but I haven't seen much else. I actually have a big blind spot with his work, and I'm starting to get more and more into it. And this is actually one of the ones that really spoke to me, weirdly enough, and gave me a little bit of a nightmare at the very end of the movie, because it kind of ends in a wild way, as most Lucio Fulci films do. They get really intense really fast, and then the effects are absolutely amazing. But this is a film that is dubbed over in Italian, and well, actually no, there are a lot of Italian actors dubbed over in English, and that's the version that I watched. This actually comes in English and Italian, but I watched the English dub because for some reason I love watching the Italian dubbed movies in English to see kind of the over-the-topness. It's got like this weird charm to it because it's definitely very specific to that country and the films that come out from them. But regardless, this movie right here is about a family who moves into this home that's definitely owned by somebody a previous tenant who had done really crazy experiments and have done some wild murders. And there's a locked door to a basement that people keep, I guess, fixating on, and it's a little strange right there. But there's this family, there's this mother and father, and then there's this little kid, and the kid is really, really funny, especially in the English dub. If you watch the type of words that he's saying, is like you can definitely tell an adult is doing his voice, but it is a romp nonetheless for that particular reason. But the horrifying moments in this movie are definitely ramped up to 11, because by the time that we realize what's down here in the basement, what's taking people out left and right, there's even this babysitter who definitely is not all there, who is also maybe has something to do with the basement itself. But it gets really intense. In fact, this is something that I'm really excited to kind of just jump back into a little bit and explore. But this actually might be one of my favorite Fulci films that I've watched. And I don't necessarily think this is one that a lot of people are like, this is like one of their favorites. But so far, this might be my favorite of Fulci's, because I just really love kind of the family atmosphere in this creepy haunted house that have a lot of these weird, crazy experiments going on. And then it ends in a very intensified, wild way, and in the best way possible. And definitely I'm not going to spoil anything, but this is a really good 4K from Blue Underground. It looks delightful. It is a very, very beautiful looking film. And there's also a couple of special features in here, which I didn't really jump into too much, but I will in the future, and I'm excited to watch more Fulci. So before we jump into the box set, there's one more other film that I want to talk about. This one is from 1991, one that actually is still in my player because I am watching the special features of this film. It is The Sect, and this is directed by, I'm always going to say this person's name incorrectly, Savoy, and it is directed, or it's actually produced by Dario Argento, which we talked about Phenomena last week. It's been an Italian week, honestly, and it's been a lot of fun. But so after watching The Church from Savoy, I realized that Savoy really loves underground hellholes that lead to crazy things. And so this is actually starring Kelly Curtis, who is Jamie Lee Curtis's sister, who is our main character in this movie. Another English dubbed movie, but obviously she did her own voice, and there's a couple of people who didn't do their own voice, but it is a little silly, but not as silly as that Fulci film in terms of like the dubbing. But it is really interesting to think of, Savoy's work of, thinking of The Church and now watching this movie. Then I also have Della Morte Dell'Amore, which I'll be watching soon as well, which is on the queue. But it's been really fun to just kind of watch these, this filmmaker as they develop from stage fright all the way to this film. But this movie, like I said, is starring Kelly Curtis, who is our main character. She is, unbeknownst to herself, a key character in this satanic cult that is. There's a lot of things going on in this home where, like I said, the underground have something to do with the satanic cult, but there's also some really interesting camera work and also some interesting characters that pop in and out. At the very beginning of the movie, there's a biker gang that, destroys this hippie commune that they're just, hanging out and having, painting each other and then also eating food. And then all of a sudden, this biker gang comes out of nowhere. And this one guy who is a prophet, but also has something to do with Satan. So regardless, anyway, I'm probably not making any sense, but The Sect also kind of makes a little bit of, it jumps all over the place, but there's some good imagery around here. There's even a little heron right here that is... has something to do with the movie and a little bit vicious in that sense. But these movies right here, both of these, the Fulci and the Savoy film, they're a little bit more intense on the gore side of things. And so definitely if you're not, into that kind of stuff, I definitely would recommend checking other films out, but like the ones that I'm going to be covering here in a bit. But yeah, The Sect, really good time. I'd give this movie a solid 3.5 out of 5. I really enjoyed this one. And then also I forgot to say that The House by the Cemetery, that's a 4.5 out of 5 for me. That's how much I love that movie. So now let's jump into the Criterion flash haul that I got. So this last Tuesday, Criterion actually had a flash sale on their website where it was 50% off MSRP, and I am a little bit on my budget right now, so I'm only picking up a few titles, and also November's right around the corner, so there's definitely a lot of things coming about, and Barnes & Noble will also have a 50% off sale during the month, so I definitely only wanted to pick up a few things, and I actually picked up the sequences of here. This is spine number 1235, 1236, and 1237. Two of them are horror films. One, I would say, might be considered a horror film. Let's talk about the one that might be considered it first, Happiness. This is a movie that I've been warned about by a lot of people, but I got this 4K. This is directed by Todd Solondz, who I am a fan of his work because I've seen a little bit of his work with in Radiance Films with one of their releases, and I'm excited to kind of jump into this movie, but I heard that the subject material itself is quite intense. In fact, it's stuff that I can't really talk about on camera probably, but I will watch this movie and I will talk about it a little bit in the future. So I'm excited to check out Happiness. Now, the other two films are horror films. In fact, one is a double feature and one that a lot of people probably picked up. It is the Val Lewton produced by kind of combo 4K of I Walk with a Zombie and The Seventh Victim, directed by Jacques Turner and Mark Robson, respectively. I'm excited to jump into this. I've never watched I Walk with a Zombie, and this is actually kind of the one why I'm like, okay, I want to watch this. But I've loved everything that Turner's done, and I've also enjoyed all the stuff that Val Lewton has done with like Cat People and whatnot. These are some classic horror films. This is actually from 1943 and 1943 both, and so these classic horror films definitely laid a landscape to the films that would be coming out later on in, with Hammer Horror in the 50s and even up to these Danza Macabra sets we're going to talk about in the 60s. But yeah, I'm excited to jump into this double feature, and it probably will be sooner later rather than later. And the last film I picked up is Demon Pond on 4K. This came out in 1979 and is a folk Japanese horror film that is directed by Mashiro Shinoda, which I don't believe I've seen many of their films, but I could be mistaken. But I was definitely interested in this just based on the cover alone, but also the folk horror aspect of it and the kabuki tale, that kind of reimagination of what this is going to be like. I have a feeling it's going to be a little bit like Kawaii, or something along those lines, where it's going to be a really spooky Japanese horror film that I'm really excited about jumping into. In fact, ever since watching the Ju-on collection, I just want to go back and watch a lot of these films like Onibaba and the like, and I'm just in that headspace to watch more Japanese horror films. And Demon Pond is definitely going to be one that's going to be coming up soon as well. So those are the things that I picked up during the flash sale. I would love to know what you picked up, or what you plan on picking up in the month of November, if you're going to get some stuff from Criterion and Barnes & Noble. So as I was filming this, I also realized that I forgot to talk about a package that I got this week that I'm really excited to showcase, mainly because last week I talked about the Mexico Macabre set, because I got El Vampiro right here, the Vampire and the Vampire's Coffin. So this is a double feature from Indicator, and this is just a gorgeous looking film, set of films. This is something I'm really, really excited about. Like I said, the Mexico Macabre set really blew me away. So getting this is actually really exciting. In fact, right there is the Count. In fact, this Count is Count Lavid, I don't know. Anyway, I'm excited to jump into this. So Almeida films here that are, some predating the ones that we talked about in the set from the Mexico Macabre set. So I got that in the mail. I also got a box set, which I'll cover here in a second. But the other thing I picked up is Guest House Paradiso. There's a young Simon Pegg. This is from 1999. This is starring Adrian Edmondson and Rick Mayall. And I don't know much about this, but I've been told by a few people that I really trust that they enjoy it, and then there's a few people who don't like it. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm excited to check this one out. This looks like a really kind of fun black comedy of sorts. And then the last thing I got is this Columbia horror set. That Columbia did not put out much horror during this time. A lot of Universal kind of had that, but this is also, I know some people are going to be like, this is a stretch for some of these films being horror, but regardless, I always love these kind of things here. So this Columbia horror set has 6 films in it. In fact, it's really slender, and there's the 6 films themselves. You can read there, but Behind the Mask, Black Moon, Airhawks, Island of the Doomed Men, Cry of the Wolf, and The Soul of a Monster. But I really like how thin this is. Like, look at that. If you're comparing it to a normal Blu-ray case, that's actually quite thin. So seeing it like that is quite cool. So I got the limited. I got number 280 out of 6,000. But there's the set itself. There are the films like that, and then there are the run times. But I'm excited about this. One, got some good reading material that I'm excited about. That also has the 6 films here. I guess it's 2 per disc. So there's like Cry of the Werewolf and The Soul of a Monster. And then we also have Airhawks there. And followed by Island of Doomed Men. It's got Peter Lorre in it, so that should be fun. And then Behind the Mask, right there. And the final film, Black Moon. Anyway, regardless, I'm excited to check out the Vampire set, the Columbia horror sets, and check out more of these classic cinema pieces of horror films, which, I guess it'll never stop. So that being said, let's jump back into the video where we're covering some Italian horror. Now let's jump into the final thing in this video, where we're going to be covering the great box set that is Danza Macabra Volume 1. Alright, so let's jump into this box set right here. So this is actually the 3rd box set I watched during the month of October, and it's been really fun jumping into these different layers and different regions and areas of horror that I haven't really explored that much before. And so this stuff right here is from the mid-60s to the early 70s. That's what this box set is with the Danza Macabra. So we're going to be talking about The Monster of the Opera, The Seventh Grave, Scream of the Demon Lover, and Lady Frankenstein. And right there is Lady Frankenstein on the cover, this iconic and beautiful looking package from Severin, which honestly, there's been a Severin theme here. I talked about a Savoy, talked about the folk horror box set, and now we're talking about this. So there's been a Severin theme and also an Italian theme here going on recently. But here are the films themselves in this nice box set. I really love this sleek design that Severin puts out on pretty much all their box sets. In fact, there's ones behind me right here, like the Danza Macabra Volume 2, which also look like that, the Nasty Habits, the Nunsploitation Collection, and the like all the way down the row. But let's jump into these movies. Let's go one by one. And I went in chronological order. The first 2 films are in black and white, and then the other 2 are in color. And like I said before, we're going to be jumping into some Italian films. We're going to get to the dubbing later, but we're actually going to cover a first film, which actually is all in Italian and came out in 1964. This is The Monster of the Opera right here. And this movie is a vampire movie. You can tell right there by the fangs, and then also just the cover itself. But this movie, it might be my least favorite of the films. In fact, I would argue that the first 2 are probably my least favorite of the films, but this is a very interesting film. It's about a theater troupe who is stuck in this theater where they awaken this vampire that has, I guess, been staying there for a very, very long time, or at least his family lineage has been cursed. And there's this woman who keeps having, visions of this man and the vampire and like of the past life, like because they're connected in some manner. But this vampire kills people with like a pitchfork, and also turns people into skeletons. It's a very strange mix of a lot of things, but it's really fun to jump into this movie and just see the theater kid reaction of that's one of the things that, I say fun. I also mean a little annoying, because that's probably the worst part of it, is it kind of meanders a lot and doesn't really show much of the gothic side. It really just jumps into what these theater kids are doing. But this movie has some really interesting effects, and like I said, it's really interesting to kind of just use a pitchfork and turn people into skeletons. So there's not much biting in this movie. There is some biting, but it looks more like necking. But you can't see like any penetration, I suppose. But yeah, this movie is an interesting Italian film, definitely of its time period. And there's actually some special features. I actually watched all the special features in here except for the commentaries, which I do all the time, unfortunately. But there is a Terror at the Opera interview with screenwriter Ernesto Gastaldi, and there's also a Capodimonte Gothic interview with Italian film devotee Mark Thomason Ashworth, and Radio Polesi, an archival audio interview with director Renato Polesi. And yeah, this was actually a really fun little special feature content. I think the one that got me the most was talking about Ernesto Gastaldi, who is the one who is the behind the scenes, looking at the screenwriter of this film and looking at his time and thinking about this during this time period when they created this movie. It was just an interesting time in the Italian movie business in general, and so this was something where it almost feels like a crossover into a lot of the stuff that eventually Hammer would do, which we're going to get to Hammer films here in a second. I'd give this movie a 2.5 out of 5. It's not anything to go home about. It's definitely worth a watch, but I definitely wouldn't say this is anything that's like super groundbreaking. But it was a fun time nonetheless. So now let's jump into the second film, The Seventh Curse, which is definitely more like a haunted house type of film. This movie came out in 1965, so a year later. It's also in black and white and also in Italian, and this was a lot of fun, but also it's more on that haunted house side of it. This movie, you can tell by the cover, looks a little scary and might have some kind of being taking this woman off. There's not really that. There are some frightening things going on in the background, but for the most part, there's a seance at the beginning of the movie that I think is probably the most compelling thing in the movie itself and has like some really cool special effects. But then it starts turning into something like The Haunting, which if anyone's seen that movie, came out a couple years prior to this in the US, and is about this haunted house and all these different spooky things. So it's another one that's not necessarily super complete, but another interesting thing here is this movie right here was considered lost, I suppose, and they found this actually 50 years later. And it's really interesting that Gabrieldi Sarah Caracciolo, who is the only this is the only film that they directed, and a lot of people just don't really know much about this filmmaker. So it was interesting kind of going into the special features here, thinking about that and thinking about how they lost this movie. And there is Seven Graves and a Mystery interview with film historian Fabio Bellelli. And then there's also English Aesthetic with Giallo Blood, which is a video scholar, Rachel Knightley, who does this gothic tale. Like I said, this is more on the haunted, haunted side of things, so a haunted house. So there is definitely some gothic imagery in here. In fact, this feels a lot more like The Cat and the Canary, if anyone's seen a film like that. It really is a fun time, but again, this movie is probably like a solid 2.5 out of 5. It's not necessarily anything to go home about, but it's definitely worth a watch, and there's some really good sequences in here, and it's really cool to see this almost forgotten film come out in this box set. So yeah, definitely check out The Seventh Grave if you've not seen it before. And now moving to the third film, we are talking about Scream of the Demon Lover. One of the films that I actually enjoyed the most in this box set. This came out in 1970. It is an Italian and Spanish co-production and is more of that gothic tale. It definitely has some gothic stuff that are like The Seventh Curse, but this movie is about scorned lovers, and you can tell in the title itself, the demon lover is definitely very present. It's about a forbidden relationship between a botanist and a baron, who at first, the baron, I'm not necessarily a big fan of. In fact, overall, I'm still a little bit questionable about the baron and how much likability or at least charm he has. But apparently everyone who lives at the baron's castle is really into him and really enamored by him. In fact, he's got 2 other women who work for him who are just in love with him. But anyway, we also have, like I said, this botanist who is just new to the town, and then she falls in love with this baron. But there's some killings that are going on around, and I'm not going to spoil too much because there's some very interesting elements to this movie that I think are, when it is revealed, it's not necessarily like revelatory, but at the same time, you're like, oh, that's really cool that is the way this movie is going. So there's some twists near the end of the movie that kind of reveal what's going on in the background, and there's some really good makeup as well with that character, and those characters going on in the back. But like I said, I'm not going to get too much into it, but this movie was really fun, and this is directed by Jose Luis Moreno, who made The Hanging Woman, and this movie has some special features where we have some commentary, and then we also have Erna Scream interview with actress Erna Schurer, who is our main character in this, who is the botanist. And it also has In the Castle of Blood video essay by Stephen Thrower, author of books on Jess Franco and Lucio Fulci. He also talks a lot about this film in particular and how revealing it is. This one is also a little bit more sexual. I didn't mention that, but if you are into that kind of stuff, that schlees that the Italian schlocky films would turn more into, this movie is when they started turning up and ramping that up a little bit. And there's some scary sequences in this movie that I actually still think about to this day. So Scream of the Demon Lover, I'd give a 4 out of 5. It really is a fun time and definitely worth watching out of this box set. But we're actually going to come up to my favorite film in the box set, Lady Frankenstein. This movie is just terrific, a terrific gothic horror bliss. And this movie is also, again, very much like the film we just talked about, has some gratuitous violence and also a lot of sexuality. In fact, some really intense sexuality. In fact, Lady Frankenstein herself gets herself involved in some of that. And that's Rosabella Neri, who is a fantastic Lady Frankenstein, but not just for the gratuitous side of it, but also just very, very well presented in this character who manipulates everybody around her in the best way possible, but also for her sequences of science, right? Her thinking of science. She is the daughter of Victor Frankenstein, who is played by Joseph Cotten, who is that amazing Hollywood legend, of course, you've seen in Citizen Kane and the like, and all of Hitchcock's films. But, there are really interesting, compelling father and daughter kind of moments at the very beginning of the film where Joseph Cotten who actually voices his own self. Again, this is dubbed, so everyone is dubbed over. So it's a little bit funny, but Joseph Cotten actually dubs himself, and I think he might be the only one who dubbed himself. In fact, that's the director actually talked about that, and Rosabala, she didn't do her own dubbing, but she was terrific nonetheless. Just stage, like, just the presence herself. But yeah, father and daughter, Lady Frankenstein takes over what the father wants to do, because there's a monster that is created right here who has some really cool, terrific special effects, kind of cheesy and schlocky. But there's actually this eye that's like up here, and this guy is like 7 foot tall, I think like 8 feet tall. I don't know how tall this guy is, but the prosthetics make him that tall. And this monster is created by Joseph Cotten, and starts running amok. But Lady Frankenstein pretty much is like, hey, I need to make another monster myself to stop this, but also maybe some ulterior motives are going on in the background. But this movie is terrific. It's got all the gothic horror that I really, really enjoy. There's a lot of really creepy sequences, kind of on the background, and also just some daylight horror, as you would see in Frankenstein films, right? You would see in a lot of Frankenstein films where there are elements of like villagers getting killed by the creature. And so it's a really fascinating film, and one that I was really fascinated to jump into the special features, which there are plenty here. And I watched a lot of it, and I'm not going to jump into too much of it, but there are so many things in here besides like censorship cuts, opening credits from Italian, some image galleries. There's actually a really good German documentary that was in 2007, The Truth About Lady Frankenstein. There's one character in here in particular. He actually watches it himself. He's actually one of the bad guys in this movie. He's like a hired guy who like gets bodies, a cadaver guy who gets bodies to Frankenstein, and he's really kind of slimy, but he watches it and the footage, and there's some really cool revelatory moments there. There's also Piecing Together Lady Frankenstein, which is a really cool piece, meeting the Baroness, who is starring Rosabella Neri and film historian Fabio Melletti, and they talk about their time on the film and her influence on a lot of the horror that would happen. There's some commentaries here as well. This is definitely a little bit more like a Hammer horror film, and definitely has some of those elements in it, but I think it has this almost Italian charm to it that I think makes it very, very different from those types of films. So overall, this is like a 4 out of 5 as well. Really fun box set. This box set, this Danza Macabra set, is really fun, and I'm excited to jump into Volume 2, which has Castle of Blood, which I know is a really big title. And then also the Spanish Gothic, Volume 3, which I just recently picked up as well. But this box set is fun to watch these movies, so definitely check out those movies, or at least look into them before you buy that box set itself. But yeah, I want to know down in the comment section down below, if you've seen any of these titles, have you seen any of the Argento titles or the Savoy titles, or what did you pick up during the Criterion sale? I would love to know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm running out of air because I am still recovering from a sickness that I had a couple weeks ago. And yeah, anyway, give it a like, comment down below, share, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.